And basically it was like, yeah, we're going to beat the MacBook Air. Yusuf Mehdi, who's executive vice president of Microsoft, basically is like a MacBook Air with an M3. These computers will beat those by 50% on Cinebench. So they are making huge performance claims on these PCs. Right. They're also thin and light. There's some question I think John Gruber raised about whether they have fans, as though people care.
They do. Some of them have fans.
Some of them are going to have fans.
Yeah.
Fine. But MacBooks have thermal throttling issues, particularly the Air, right?
So I'd like to say that every time I see stuff like this, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I think the most important thing people need to realize, especially when it comes to the internet, is that the internet is full of people and everybody has their own opinion. And while Nilay is chuckling about the fact that some people are concerned as to whether or not these Snapdragon chips are going to have fans, that was probably number 3 or number 4 on my list of concerns when it comes to these machines, because if the comparison is always drawn between any of these Snapdragon machines and the MacBook Air doesn't have a fan. And having used machines that have fans, it's nice to know that this one in particular was always going to be dead silent, regardless of what I'm doing. Now, he does bring up a good point, saying that MacBook Airs have thermal throttling issues, which is true because they're passively cooled. But if 97% of the stuff that I do doesn't require some type of intense level of performance, doesn't require or wouldn't really benefit from the use of a fan, then I'm okay not having it. And if any of these comparisons were to the MacBook Pros, then I'd say, okay, fans, we'll see. But I don't want a machine that has a fan. I have a machine that has a fan. I have a bunch of Windows machines that are x86 machines that have fans. I like my MacBook Air because it does not have a fan. So Nilay might not care about it, but a lot of people do, especially if what John Gruber was talking about and some other people said a few things. And I'd also point out that Nilay, not in this episode, but he plenty of times has brought up the fact that he still has I think a 2015 iMac Pro or something. And yeah, like the fans on that thing are always going crazy. So yeah, fan noise is bothersome. And to have a machine that is as powerful as the MacBook Air and also doesn't have a fan would definitely be great.
They do slow down. So if you want to run these computers really hard with AI workloads, which are essentially on a GPU-like piece of the processor, make it hot. But we're expecting good battery life.
Consider subscribing.
I don't know, a week and a half to really kind of configure it. And even now, I'm still like fiddling with it. But this has 50 wires, and there's so much stuff that I have to tweak and fix all the time. Not so much fix, but there's so much stuff that I need to fiddle with. And all of this thing hinges on that computer right there, a very decked out Mac Studio. Now, before I had that Mac, I used to run it on a regular Windows PC. I had an RTX 4090 and a 13th gen Intel system. I also tried an AMD system. Those PCs were way too loud for what I'm doing because we have 4K cameras.
Now, I wanted to include this because I could not agree more with the fact that with the traditional Intel or AMD computer that we're used to, which could have been a Windows or a Mac of yesteryear when they had Intel chips in them, those fans would just go crazy. And the main reason I even have this MacBook Pro is because I bought a Dell Precision 54 whatever, Intel Core i9, blah, 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 32 gigs of RAM. And the moment I opened, whether it was OBS, I forget which one, but I just had it open. Wasn't even doing anything. And the fans kicked up. I said, oh no, like I can't do this. And like right now I'm using the microphone. So if the fans were running super high on the machine itself, I'm sure you pick up a lot of that. Right now the AC is running, so I hope you don't hear too much of that. Hopefully I can cancel that out. But the whole point of what he's saying, the whole point of what I'm saying, why I want to include this clip, is that fan noise makes a difference. And like the first clip was Nilay laughing and, oh, well, if you want to do certain stuff, blah, 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 blah. Well, a lot of the things, that I do on my MacBook Air, which is, again, what they constantly compare these devices to, I don't need a fan. So it's really going to bother some people, possibly myself included, if these devices do in fact have fans.
That are being fed into a thing. It's encoded live, and sometimes I would stream this stuff out. So all of that processing, it can handle it on a regular Windows system, but the fan noise was really annoying to work around it. So I tried running the system in a separate room, but it's just like I wanted access to the computer. Like, it was a pain. So I got this M2 Mac Studio in.
And in fact, I also got an M1 Mac Studio a while ago, and I've since sold it. But even though those machines have fans and this MacBook Pro has a fan, Apple has tuned them to a certain way where they aren't bothersome. So not having a fan would be great, especially if you're comparing it to the MacBook Air. But if it has a fan, how exactly are they going to be tuned? How annoying are they going to be?
But it's a borrowed unit.
Consider subscribing.
And of course, it is a Yoga, so it is aimed at consumers. And I will point out, if you're wondering, are there fans? Because a lot of people think, oh, ARM, you don't need fans. But there actually are fans in this laptop. I have heard early people say they've not heard the fans spool up, but the fact that you have the fans is good, because under some workloads, it's possible the fans may turn on. So,
and again, yes, like that is a true statement. Under certain workloads, the machines will benefit from having fans. But, and even though I always have my gripes when it comes to Apple as a company, the way they market their MacBook Air is that this is just your standard run-of-the-mill consumer grade device. You can do some of the more intensive things on it, but it's really not designed for that. And one of the benefits you get from having a device that isn't designed to do all of those intensive things is the fact that it doesn't require a fan. And he's going to say one more thing, but I'll just say this before I forget, because I almost did forget, is that my roommate had the very last Intel MacBook Air. Had an i3 in it and some RAM and whatever the storage was, really don't care. But had a fan, it was Intel one, and the fan on that thing would kick up for absolutely no reason, and it annoyed her so much. And if she ever saw this video, she'd probably deny what I'm about to say, but it annoyed her so much that the notion of getting another MacBook Air because of the fan noise was something she just flat out wasn't willing to do. So when the M1 and then when the M2 MacBook Airs came around, I said, well, I think these will do what you need them to do. And she's like, no, I don't want another Air. And I'm like, but they don't even have fans. So like the noise you experienced with that MacBook Air is just literally impossible because the hardware, i.e. the fans, just physically aren't even there. And what has she purchased since then? She has a 14-inch MacBook Pro and iPads. I don't think she's ever going to buy a MacBook Air again because the one that she did have, the fan noise was that bad. And maybe at one point she'll get over it. But yeah, like I feel like that was one of the main reasons she was like, I don't want to have to deal with that fan noise again. So fan noise is important.
the fact that you have fans should help, but obviously expectations are you're not going to get the typical x86 fan noise that we're so used to.
Now, I'm happy he said that because while I want to agree with the underlying message, the words themselves together don't mean anything. Because, as we know, these fans are all made differently and they can be designed to try to dissipate heat differently, which then could also, I guess, lead to a design that doesn't produce as much noise. Like that's really what it boils down to. There are two massive fans in this MacBook Pro 16-inch. But even when I'm actually doing stuff, if I put my ear to the keyboard, sometimes I can hear it, but I will just flat out render like an hour-long video. And yeah, I might hear it. And I think I did render like a 2-hour-long video once. And yeah, they kicked up. But even then, that was still less annoying than what happened when I turned on or started using OBS or DaVinci Resolve on my Intel Dell machine, which again, wasn't even doing anything. So not having fans in these devices that we are comparing with MacBook Airs would be optimal. But since it appears that fans are going to be in the devices, how exactly are they going to be tuned? I don't really care for Mac OS, but the hardware that I'm using when it comes to that MacBook Air, I am extremely satisfied with. And one of the reasons I'm satisfied with it is because there is zero fan noise.
Can you show me something cool? Well, you know what? I got that right here. And that's the inside of the T14S, because we know what's inside is what matters to you, internet, and we've popped the back off of the T14S so you can take a look. Again, a lot of people would assume that an ARM CPU would be fanless. That's actually not true. Apple ARM laptops actually have fans. The T14S actually has a very nice, decent fan on it.
And just like before, it's like he's putting words together that fundamentally, yes, have meaning. And that was half true, that yes, the MacBook Pros have fans, but the machine that these things are being compared to, the MacBook Air, does not have a fan. And I mean, I know at this point, I think we're probably 10 to 15 minutes into this video and I just keep repeating myself, but that is part of the user experience. The MacBook Air, that's in the other room, but when I use that, it is a joy to use because I never have to worry about the fans. And if this machine, yes, runs more efficiently, doesn't generate as much heat, it'd be ideal if I also had no fan noise, but we don't know. So the reviewers will get them, and then some of them actually do hold up the microphones close to the fans to see exactly what we're dealing with. But I feel like that's a whole nother ball game when it comes to the design of the machine, where each one of these little vendors is going to decide, well, do we need to put a fan in it? And if the answer is no, then cool, no fan. But for the ones that do decide to put fans in, what type of experience are we going to get? And I don't know if that's something they actually care about. Apple does. They have made it clear that with these Apple Silicon devices, MacBook Pros and the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio, and I'd assume also the iMac, and I even guess the Mac Pro, that minimal fan noise is something that Apple has prioritized, in addition to the chips being efficient and running a little cooler, because they still get hot, so they still need to be cooled. But even when those fans are really moving, like, you'll hear something and you're like, you know what, that's not really a problem compared to all of the Windows machines that I have in there. In fact, I'll say all of the x86 machines that I have in there. So we'll see what happens. I will continue, hopeful that some of these machines will be fanless, like give us that option. But if they all just kind of copy paste and say, well, the only thing that's really changing is this chip, and then in this situation, even it looks like the SSD is one of the short guys instead of one of the long ones, the hope just might be like, well, it doesn't get as hot, so the fans won't spin up as much, as opposed to actually putting some R&D into the design of a quieter fan, or realizing that some people are willing to sacrifice some performance for a completely silent machine. And again, the last thing I'll say is, if Qualcomm or any of these other companies were saying this machine compared to the MacBook Pro, then I'd say, okay, cool. I understand it has a fan. Now, yes, definitely. How does that fan sound? But since they are comparing it to the MacBook Air, I got to ask, like, all right, does it need a fan? And if it does, how loud is it going to be? And lastly, and I think Nilay said it at the beginning, that Qualcomm is stating that you'll see like 50% improvements for some task. At that point, since we are comparing it to just the M3, how does that now stack up to the M3 Pro or Max? Probably not the Max, but still, it's just like, well, if you're saying it's so much better than Apple's base chip, why aren't you now comparing it to its mid-level chip? Just asking.